Hello and good evening to Let's Play Neverwinter. We're going to have a look at the Oathbound Paladin, and so right now anyone who's actually looking or thinking of playing the Oathbound Paladin may have been told that perhaps they make better healers. Maybe they're not as good tanks as the Guardian Fighter. They make okay healers. Actually, they probably make some of the better healers in the game, but that doesn't mean that they're bad tanks. In fact, I think that, personally, I believe that they make excellent tanks. They are at least on par with the Guardian Fighter from everything that I've seen. I do have a Guardian Fighter myself, I just haven't played it enough to really actually compare the two, but the way I see it, the Oathbound Paladin has a couple things that the Guardian Fighter does not, and vice versa. The Guardian Fighter has a few things the Oathbound Paladin does not, such as being able to, well, the Guardian Fighter can actually attack while using a shield for cover. The Paladin cannot. The Paladin, however, can also heal itself by blocking. So that's actually quite handy. It's not a whole lot of healing, but it definitely can go a long way. One of the major components, however, to your survivability as an Oathbound Paladin is the temporary hit point pool that you can generate when you're in combat. So what temporary hit points are is they are an extra layer of health that enemies have to dig through before they can actually hurt you. Which is pretty damn cool, if you ask my opinion. Now, beyond that, you've also got a huge amount of damage resistance that you get from a bunch of the different skills you have, and you also have a decent amount of actual damage output that you are able to do. Obviously, it's not going to be on par with the DPS class, but it's still going to be decent for a tank, and I tend to play a lot of tanks in a lot of different games. So, one thing I did want to show, so you have an idea of what I mean by damage resistance, is my character off the bat is going to resist 41.7% of all inbound damage. Can this be better? Absolutely. There's a few ways that we can make this better, though. And one of them is actually through one of the powers that you have as an Oathbound Paladin. Now, it doesn't show you here that your damage resistance goes up at all. However, the power I just used actually increases my damage resistance by another 30%. So that actually brings it up quite high. But anyways, having said that, I want to show you guys something. So watch my health bar. You'll see a yellow health bar that pops up there. Think of it like, you know, in some games you have the shields and whatnot, and your health bar goes blue. Well, that's kind of the same thing, only that's what they call temporary hit points in this game. So that is definitely one of the main components to you staying alive in just playing a Oathbound Paladin, is having a huge temporary hit point pool. Obviously, pushing your damage resistance even more than what I have, probably also a really good idea. Some people will also even stack deflect, which I haven't done yet, but probably should. So don't get me wrong, my Oathbound Paladin is fun to play, quite potent, but definitely not geared up as she could be. I'm only sitting on about 2400 gear score with her, so anyone who does play the game should know that that's not really all that high. Now, let's have a look at the feats, and let's actually have a look at the powers to see what synergizes and how, because the Oathbound Paladin as a tank obviously has to survive. Well, how do you survive? How do you keep your skills up? And they also bring a lot of buffs to the party. So let's have a look at the standard feats first. I mean, obviously there's not a whole lot to them. As you could expect, toughness, extra hit points. 9% extra hit points, in fact. Divine action, I was on the fence about this. I kind of wanted to take weapon mastery, but I took Divine Action instead because Divine Call, which is your taunt, now actually helps regenerate action points for the daily powers. And this is important because your daily powers are actually one of the main components to not just you staying alive, but also your party. Light Shield. Increase your damage resistance by 2.5%. Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. You must have this if you are playing a tank. Exemplar's Haste. Your encounter powers recharge faster. At this case, it's actually only 4% faster, but it makes a big difference. And last but not least, Steadfast. Each point of Constitution now grants an additional, in my case, 2.5% maximum hit points. Much like Toughness, more hit points is a good thing. Now, what I'm not telling you is, other than the obvious, but there's actually another reason why you want more hit points. Now, I'll get into that in a little later because it's actually to do with your powers. So, Paragons, Oath of Protection, and Justice is where I did the vast majority of my focus. I have Swift Flash. When you are struck by a foe, you have a chance to trigger a flash, granting you an increased movement speed of up to 30% for 4 seconds. This can only happen once every 10 seconds. Honestly, it's kind of fun. It has great utility as well, so if you're in a fight and you get hit and you need to cover distance really quickly because another team member, maybe they pulled aggro or maybe there was another mob that showed up that you didn't see, this is a great way to close the distance very quickly. Mind you, because it is random, it's probably not the kind of thing you want to rely on all the time. But it's there, and when it triggers, you can use it. Flash of Light. Your encounter powers have a up to 25% chance to reduce the cooldown of your nearby allies' encounter powers by 10%. So this is what I was meaning about bringing buffs to the table for your party. When you use a power, you now have a good chance, or a 1 in 4 chance if you will, to reduce the cooldown timers of your party. This is very handy because the more you do this, the more your own party can DPS, the faster fights will go. Radiant Champion. Your very presence inspires your allies. When you have at least 2 other allies within 30 feet of you, all of you gain 25% more movement and an extra 5% cooldown reduction. More skills all the time and being able to cover ground faster. You really can't complain about that. And you need to at least be in a party of 3 people, so you and 2 others. And I don't believe your hired companions count. They might, but I don't believe they do. Echoes of Light. Your at-will powers have a 10% chance to trigger Echo on you. Echo makes your next encounter power instantly recharge all of your encounter powers. This effect can only occur once every 15 seconds. Now, I think somewhere in this is also an interest, and I have to recheck this. I could be wrong, but Echoes of Light can also trigger, from what I saw, on Aura of Vengeance, which is a passive that deals damage when enemies hit you. 10% chance if you've got a lot of guys hitting you, and then you use an encounter power to recharge all your encounter powers again. It's pretty hefty. It might not do that anymore. I know it did at one point in time. I haven't actually checked it since. Haven't really noticed. Because I am often using things like Radiant Strike and Valor Strike. And Radiant Strike is an AoE ability, and I use it often. So this actually triggers fairly often. Almost every 15 seconds, Echoes of Light is triggered, so that when I use my next encounter power, it refreshes all my cooldowns. Definitely something to have, because better uptime for your temporary hit points, better uptime for things like Binding Oath to do AoE damage, better uptime for your damage resistance, big circle aura thing on the ground that you saw earlier. All in all, it's a good thing. Purifying Fire. This is kind of a fun one. Unfortunately, it is also kind of one of those powers where you might accidentally take stacks of Purifying Fire off of enemies unintentionally because you have a lot of area of effect powers. However, you might not actually be triggering all of your area of effect powers within 15 to 30 seconds. So what this does, by the way, is your at-will powers apply Purifying Fire to your foes. It can stack up to 5 times, dealing 10% weapon damage each time a stack is applied. This damage is doubled for each stack applied to the target. And you can do this 5 times. Purifying Fire lasts 60 seconds, but is removed when you strike a target with an encounter power. So, long story short, when you hit a bunch of guys with a bunch of your encounter powers, basically you want to, I don't know why, but let's say you decide to use Radiant Strike on a group of guys 5 or 6 times in a row, you are now hitting them all for a very large amount of damage, not just from the Radiant Strike, but also from Purifying Fire. But let's say you then suddenly use another one of your encounter powers, all those stacks are gone. You have to start from scratch. That isn't always a bad thing, though, because you do actually need to keep using your encounter powers to survive. But definitely maximize on your Purifying Fire whenever you can, but do not build your tactics around it. Use it when it's available, use it when you're actually able to do so, but don't rely on it. Vengeful Judge. So this is actually probably my favorite feat, not just because it's the capstone feat, but this and Echoes of Light are my 2 favorites. So Vengeful Judge, your Divine Call now also applies Judge to yourself for 10 seconds. Judge increases your damage dealt by 35%, as well as reducing the cooldown of your currently recharging powers by 35%. More cooldown reduction, can't complain. Your encounter powers have a chance of immediately granting you a charge of Divine Call, so you use a charge of Divine Call, and guess what? There's a good chance you're going to get that charge of Divine Call back. It doesn't say that it has an internal cooldown, but I have never really been able to get it to trigger more than once every 10 to 15 seconds. But, again, I could be wrong. I definitely would like if someone actually out there can quote what the internal cooldown on that is, because that would be very good to know. So now, looking at some of the other Paragon feats here. Prism. Activating a daily power causes you to become a prism for up to 20 seconds. During this time, anytime you are healed, I'll say with a direct heal, all allies within 30 feet of you are also healed for this amount. This effect will not trigger from heal over time effects. Still, it's very handy. So if you're running with a priest, or maybe you're running with another paladin who is a healadin, and you've got a bunch of other guys around you that are taking a beating and you get healed, all of a sudden everyone around you gets healed for the same amount. Can't complain about that. Beacon of Hope. Activating a daily power causes you to become a Beacon of Hope for 6 seconds. Randomly, 3 allies within 30 feet who have taken damage will be healed for up to 250% of your weapon damage every 2 seconds. That's insane. That's all I'm going to say. Last but not least, I took the Light Tree Gifts of Light. You heal for up to 10% more health. I did run Bulwark originally. It was alright. Couldn't really complain. But I've been really enjoying this Justice Tree and Oath of Protection. So, let's look at the powers. I'm not going to go into a whole ton of detail of the powers that I didn't take. Just rather the ones that I did take. So, Radiant Strike and Valor Strike are the first 2 powers you start with. Radiant Strike is probably one of my major go-tos, largely because not only is it a good distance closer because you actually lunge, you slide across the ground and hit guys with your shield, but it is also an AoE damage ability. But it also increases your armor penetration and your damage dealt by 5% for the next 15 seconds. No, this does not stack. Next is Valorous Strike. Also, this doesn't stack, but it will increase your damage resistance by 5% once you complete your third hit with it. So, you can see why this would be a very useful power. So, I was mentioning a lot of hit points being a very good thing. This is why. This power that I'm looking at right now, Aura of Courage. Even if you don't take any other passives except for, say, Aura of Wisdom, which I would actually recommend that you do take, this passive should never, ever, ever leave your slot. The reason why is all of your allies within 30 feet of you deal 1% of your maximum hit points as bonus radiant damage. So 1,200 extra radiant damage on every attack every one of your allies makes at all times, regardless of what they're doing. And I've taken enough of extra power points to increase that by an extra 20% of the total damage dealt. Not an extra 20% of my hit points. That would be ridiculous. Cool, but ridiculous. So the next power I have here is the daily power Heroism. Or Heroism. Very powerful, very useful ability. Doesn't last for very long. Right now I've got it set to 8 seconds, but I gain 100% of my maximum hit points as temporary health, 15% increased damage resistance, and gain immunity to control effects for 8 seconds. That basically means you are an unstoppable wall for 8 seconds. Nothing can knock you down, nothing can throw you back. You have enough damage resistance and enough temporary hit points to basically weather almost anything that comes your way. What's not to like about it? Oh, also, you grow huge, graphically. Like, it's just pretty cool. Now, Aura of Vengeance. I'm actually kind of on the fence about this one. It's not a bad power. Between it and Aura of Wisdom, actually, I think I'm going to switch back to Aura of Wisdom, because I haven't really had a huge difference between the two. But let me tell you something interesting about Aura of Vengeance. Aura of Vengeance can stack. If you've got multiple paladins in your party, each paladin will have a boost to the damage dealt when people take damage in your party. So it actually stacks on top of each other. It's pretty handy. Now, one thing it used to, and as I had mentioned this before, and I want clarification on this, but Aura of Vengeance used to also actually trigger one of your cooldown effects. More specifically, this one, Echoes of Light. Now, let me go back to powers here. Now, on the assumption that it probably doesn't work that way anymore, because, let's face it, if I was a developer, and if that wasn't intentional, I would probably remove that. So Aura of Wisdom would probably be your go-to here, and right now I have it set to a 20% increased recharge speed. Again, faster cooldowns for me and my party means better uptime for skills. What's not to like about this? Templar's Wrath. This is the one I want to spend time talking about, because this is going to be your bread and butter skill. This is your bread and butter power. This is what gives you your temporary hit points. This is what makes you survivable. If you ever fight Emberclaw in the Fiery Pit, and you're sitting on him normally about, let's say, 100,000 hit points, you go into that fight and you don't use this power, you will die. If you use this power and you use this power religiously, you will stalemate Emberclaw and all of his goons. He can't hurt you. So, here's why and here's how this works. So when you use this power, it is a focused AoE ability around your character, and when you've got Oath of Protection, which is what you should have if you're playing a Protection Paladin, it will give you temporary hit points equal to 300% of the damage you deal to everything. Not just to what you're targeting, to everything. There is a target limit. I don't know how many targets it is. I haven't actually been able to pay attention. I've been usually too busy in the middle of a fight. But I have been sitting on a temporary hit point bar that has been so large that it technically has gone off the bottom of the screen because I can sit there and keep taking damage and it will not go down. Now, obviously, I have also taken an extra 4 ranks in this, so I have increased the damage output by an extra 45%. So this is a must-have. This is one of your big survivability abilities. Now, then we're going to get into Binding Oath here. Binding Oath is a fun power. It takes all the incoming damage, and what it does is it doesn't let you take any of the damage for the next, well, when you first get it, it's 2 seconds. It's a very short duration. So for the first 2 seconds, you take no damage. When it ends, you take half of that damage to yourself, and then 20% of the damage that it absorbed gets sent back to the enemies around you, up to a maximum of your hit points, whatever your max hit points is. Now, obviously, increasing the duration of this ability means that all of a sudden, you can now eat a lot more damage over a longer period of time, improving the amount of damage you reflect back when the timer runs out. This is a very powerful ability, but it is also an ability that can actually kill you if you're not careful. When they say the damage dealt to each target cannot exceed your maximum hit points, well, think about this for a sec. If it's only dealing 20% of the damage you took, and that 20% of the damage you took equals your maximum hit points, you took 5 times that in damage, and that also means you, let's say, 120,000 hit points is your maximum. That's 600,000 damage you just took in 6 seconds, but you only have 120,000 hit points, and half that damage being dealt to you is still 300,000 damage. You are going to die. This is also why the temporary hit points is important, because temporary hit points can add in excess of that to hit points. So this is the synergy between these abilities. You can survive using this power if you use Templar's Wrath, and you keep using it to keep building your temporary hit point pool. Binding Oath will not kill you if you do that, but if you don't do it, you will die. It gets better. Divine Protector. So Divine Protector is kind of a fun one. It is your other daily that you should be using. What it does is, in an area 150 feet around you, every ally that is out there, it will shield, and it will redirect all damage to you, 100% of all that damage. And then all that damage is reduced by 50%. If you use this with Binding Oath, you are taking 25% of that incoming damage. It's only going to be a quarter of that incoming damage. And then you are then going to dish back probably a fairly large chunk of that damage, because if a lot of people are getting hit, you're going to do a lot of damage. You're going to take a lot of damage too, so be prepared for that. I don't use Divine Protector a whole lot, but it is on my hotbar. It is there for when I absolutely need to use it. And when I have used it, I have used it to very devastating effect. I have actually dealt my hit points worth in damage to in an area around my character. And for a non-DPS class, that is actually pretty hefty. And then last but not least, Circle of Power. So Circle of Power is kind of one of those powers where you absolutely should have this up at all times and stay inside of its area of effect as much as possible. What happens is the damage you deal gets improved by 30%. You also gain 25% damage resistance. What's not to like about this? Now, in its basic state, it lasts for 20 seconds. I have increased that to 32 seconds on this character because I've ranked this up to rank 4. So for half a minute, I am doing 30% more damage, and I'm taking, I have an additional 25% damage resistance. Now, if I'm doing 30% more damage, that also means my Templar's Wrath is doing 30% more damage, which means it's doing 30% more damage at getting me another 300% of that damage back as temporary hit points. So you see how these skills work together to make you basically unkillable. So this is how I've chosen to play my Protection Paladin. It is by no means the only way to play this class. It is not a be-all, end-all. It is not going to be the cat's meow for everybody. Other people are going to have other ways of doing this. This is just the way I've decided to do it because, you know, it's actually kind of fun. It's kind of fun to go in there and see what can I take on by myself and not die. And believe me, I have encountered things that will kill me dead. But I've also encountered a lot of things that I never would have thought I could handle on my own. So it's been a very interesting class. I definitely encourage people to play it, to give it a try. If this video helps you, awesome. If you have questions, please ask in the comment section. I will do my best to answer your questions for you. And if any other members of the community or the Neverwinter community come along and you have extra information, please share. Because, I mean, I can always up my game. That's for sure. I know that I can always do better than I'm doing. So other than that, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Have a good night, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you happen to may be. And I hope to see you all in game.